My name is Chanté Lively. This is Cultural Competence in the fields of Environmental Studies and Sciences, hereafter described as ENVS. As this research project discusses cultural competence, I took three definitions from my research from the textbook by Otzel, an expert in ENVS cultural competency, Quigley, and a Boston-based private foundation committed to enhancing quality of life for all of Boston citizens, the Barr Foundation, in order to delve into what exactly cultural competence is. Cultural relations in ENVS. Before going more into the topic, you must know what ENVS is. Environmental studies is a multidisciplinary academic field which studies human interactions with the environment in the interest of studying complex problems. It's an all-encompassing field, a broad area of study that has a strong connection to the other biological fields, specifically dealing with field research, policy, sustainability, pollution, conservation, environmental injustice, etc. It often involves working with groups or in places of diverse cultures. This project validates the importance of cultural competence in relation to field research and community outreach programs, experiential environmental education on both top-down and bottom-up layers. Issues where cultural competence can be useful. In this broad field, cultural competence is a must. Majority of the following examples are research-based due to that being the focus of the field. The examples are informed consent, respect for persons and community. This is the ethical treatment of the cultural groups and providing the information to them of what possible consequences of your research so that they can make informed decisions. Respect for proprietary rights, intellectual property, and traditional resources, especially with indigenous communities. This is an understanding of abstract and concrete markers for a culture and how the research can interfere in the markers, like possible destruction. Protecting non-maleficence, providing the least harm possible to reach a beneficial outcome for cultural groups and researchers. Through cultural competence and clear communication between groups, possible misunderstandings that would eventually lead to larger issues do not come into play. Research arrogance. Looking at a project on a comprehensive, category-based and situational-based scale. In order to do a project in cultural competent manner, the whole thing must be looked at in a holistic view. This goes hand in hand with the next point, lack of representation from cultural groups, embracement of ethno-relativism. Cultural leaders slash members of the cultural group must have say in the project. No homogeneous and monolithic organizations are allowed. By letting cultural members have a say, the project would be more ethno-relative. These next two slides provide information on current cultural competency actions in ENVS, drawing them from four sources. The first source is my personal experience through internships. Due to the broad nature of ENVS, there are trainings in different organizations and companies on similar topics of cultural competency. Issues like environmental injustice require specific background information given to the environmentalist prior to beginning work, as well as working with the culture from start to finish on the project. For example, I attended multiple ENVS camps in high school. Part of the experience involved working through different environmental injustice problems based on the cultural background of the area and working on how to communicate these issues to the cultural group as a whole. In addition, NSU has environmental ethics classes. In these courses, the students learn how to identify the moral assessment of situations and recognize ethical issues specific to the context of the environment. An example, the cultural groups. Explain how one's behavior has an impact on others, and demonstrate tolerance for disagreements by taking account of and respecting points of view other than their own. The basis of my experience is the training or workshops I received and heard about place an importance on learning how to communicate with other cultures, look from their perspectives, and look at problems in a holistic view with cultural information. Source 2 is from a report from the Barr Foundation. They studied 3 organizations on their actions for cultural competence and experiential environmental education programs for children in urban areas. I chose this source since I wish to go into environmental education later in life. The report promoted encouragement of city residents to explore and enjoy the environment and assess the cultural competence of 3 organizations on multiple levels: the individual, interpersonal, program, organization, and organization's relationship with the community. The end of the report provided key practices of multifaceted approach to cultural competency. They are self-awareness, reaching people where they are, providing multiple points of access, the ability to relate to diverse youth, addressing language barriers, and providing collaborative practices with community programs and leaders. The Barr Foundation believed that by putting these practices into action, the organization would be closer to cultural competency. However, they acknowledge that cultural competency is an ongoing practice. In addition, they found that cultural competency increased when activities directed at acknowledging and addressing issues of social justice and fundamental inequalities in the environment and lives of the youth were acknowledged. Source 3 was the Northeast Ethics Education Partnership (NEEP) website. It is from Brown University Center for Environmental Studies in partnership with SUNY ESF. It started in 2010 from a grant from the National Science Foundation. NEEP promotes new research ethics training and curriculum and discussed expanding education about individual and community-based human subject protection and cultural competence for environmental research around the world. The website provided information on graduate courses, workshops, and training materials based on compiled information from their research studies. Source 3 and 4 are connected. Source 4 is the peer-reviewed articles by Quigley et al. The articles discuss research studies funded by NEEP. Quigley can be classified as an expert on cultural competence in ENVS due to the lack of peer-reviewed literature in the field. These articles discuss the necessity of cultural awareness, cultural knowledge, race-specific cultural competence, cultural encounters in citizen science, cultural encounters in equity in relation to historical events, an example what happened to the Hmong people. The studies also promote a necessity of cultural humility and cultural equity, as well as comprehensive frameworks that the ENVS field should follow. The importance of these studies were to analyze cultural competency in ENVS as a whole and see what needs to be done in order to change the field. However, there are barriers to this work, such as the lack of curricula in graduate schools and the controversy of cultural equity principles. In addition, there is a sparse amount of literature on the topic, but luckily NEEP is providing actions to solve these barriers. Here is an example of one organization, the Nature Conservancy, and how they foster cultural competency individually and on an organizational level. My recommendations on actions to increase cultural competence in my field of ENVS are, in no particular order, create ongoing environmental ethics workshops with a focus on cultural competency. There needs to be more of a focus on undergraduates, as NEEP only works on the graduate level. By starting younger, we have less resistance to a possible upheaval of attitudes and attributes, as well as graduate school is not for everyone and is not a requirement for the ENVS field. In addition, cultural competency is a continuous process that needs to be cultivated. Similar to the model of intercultural sensitivity, it is always being worked on, and ongoing workshops mean there is no complacency in the topic. There needs to be more research provided and done on cultural competency in ENVS literature. We need to build up the voices of cultural groups with representatives of cultural groups being a core member of each project. There is mindfulness that in some aspects the researcher or educator is not the expert of the topic. There needs to be a dissolving of majority group viewpoints toward culture and ENVS. We have to make it mandatory to have historical background information for each project, as history still affects the past, similar to the history-present dialect in relationships. We need to diversify the field. The more diversity in the ENVS field, the more culturally diverse project solutions will become, like in a multicultural organization. And lastly, we need to recognize the salient parts of cultural groups. In conclusion, this quote from my research about the importance of cultural competency stood out to me.